Okay. Okay. But yeah, Brian, whenever you're ready, my friend.
Okay, she's got her screen shared, but do you want me to go ahead and start sharing mine?
Yeah, you should be able to do it.
Okay.
And then we can switch back over to her.
Okay, so it's 5:31. So thank you all for coming today to this Georgia TESOL Professional Learning Series session. So the topic for tonight's session is our for the month of June and early July, we're doing a 5-part session, kind of really thinking about how to integrate language and content sort of in general and then in specific content areas. So last week we had a presentation by Dr. Elizabeth Webb, who is good, see you there, who gave us kind of really nice an introduction to the WIDA standards and how, alignment and really thinking about walking us through the WIDA standards and how they're put together and the principles behind them and all of that, which I think was a nice start off. So tonight is our second of our 5-part series of thinking about language and content, but in the area of English and language arts. So if this is your first time, if you have not attended one of our professional learning series, so normally what we do is during the year, we have about twice a month, we have talks on a variety of topics dealing with English language learners in a variety of different situations and different topics related to teaching English learners. Some of these sessions are restricted to Georgia TESOL members only. Other sessions are public. And so you don't have to be a member to attend. What we started actually is due to our illustrious second vice president, Dr. Terrell, is that we have starting this spring is where we offer, so if you register for the webinar and attend the webinar, that you get a certificate of participation, in case you need that for your files or administrators, things like that. And so this will be, like I said, we'll have a 5-part session part of this series looking at content, integrating content and language in different content areas. We'll take a break in July, and then we will start up in August with continuing kind of with this series. So throughout the year, we explored different, and we will continue to explore. The professional learning series will tackle issues related to particularly our focus for this year really has been focusing on empowerment with different stakeholder groups. So with students, parents, and communities in different ways. And here you can see on the left-hand side a sample of topics we have looked through and then some that we will continue to look through. And then this series that we're kind of in now, like I said, is kind of sort of a different sort of part of, is a bit different part of that is focusing specifically on integrating language and content in different areas. So what I would like to do now is to briefly introduce our presenter for tonight. So I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Asha Jassani. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Asha is an experienced and dedicated educational professional with a passion for serving English learners and their school communities. She's worked across a number of different content areas as an educator in both K-12 and higher education settings, serving in leadership roles in special education and ESOL teacher, as well as a coach and mentor to new educators. Asha holds a master's degree in education policy and management from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where she completed a fellowship and worked as a teaching assistant alongside tenured faculty. As the ELA/ESOL Program Specialist at the Georgia Department of Education, She is committed to bringing English learners bringing them their issues at the forefront of all conversations, striving to ensure that they are prioritized and have access to quality education. So without further ado, Asha, over to you.
I have to do this. Everyone see my screen? Yes. Okay. Okay, awesome. Thank you all so much for joining me today. We're talking about scaffolding, language, and content in ELA. So I know April already started us off by telling us a little bit about herself in the chat. If you can, please share your name, the grade levels you teach in your district, and I'm going to try to see if I can pull up the chat. I had it up for a second here, and then it just went away. It looks like I can't access it right now, but I'm sure there are wonderful answers coming up in there, and hopefully soon I'll be able to figure out how to. Thank you all again for joining. My name is Asha Jassani, like Brian said, and I'm the ESOL Program Specialist on the ELA team. Here's a picture of my lovely colleagues at the Georgia Department of Education. We are so excited to be here today, but before we get started, I wanted to do a quick housekeeping slide. We are a team at GaDOE, so my apologies if I get any of these wrong. If anyone's really good at Zoom and knows I did any of this stuff, please tell me. So we will have a lot of opportunities for you to participate in audience interaction. So please use the chat feature as well as the reaction button, which I believe you can get to by clicking on the participants button. For some reason, it's not working for me. But hopefully these will work for you. And last but not least, please make sure that you're muted unless you're talking. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to be talking today about how language can be scaffolded with the content in ELA and how we can create opportunities for language use. So in the chat box, if you could please answer the following question. What is the difference between language and content objectives? And you may call these learning targets, learning outcome. You might have a different phrase for this, but whatever terminology you do use, you can answer that in the chat. Carol, can you tell me if you start seeing answers pop up in the chat box? Okay. Oh, awesome. Okay. So I see some folks answering right now. Language objectives are broader and they may contain objectives in it. Language objectives focus on what the students need to be able to do with the language to demonstrate content mastery. Great. So as those are rolling in for us, I'm going to share how I like to think about it. So I like to think about content as a what and language as a how. And those is really a good way, the language expectations, to intentionally plan for the language demands and linguistic needs of our students. And the reason why, you may have noticed me put the quotes next to language expectations. I'm sure Dr. Webb has talked about this before, how WIDA has the language expectations. In the past, I've heard people use terminology like language objectives, but I'm specifically talking about WIDA's language expectation. And here is an example of a language expectation. This might be a review for some folks, so I'm going to go through it kind of quickly. The language expectations focuses on a language student's need in a specific content area. Right here, you'll see that at the beginning. And then WIDA has these 5 standards, and each one of them represent a content area, except for standard 1, which is the one that we're thinking about all the time, that's the language for social and instructional purposes. And then, of course, it is for a specific grade level cluster in a specific key language use. So maybe perhaps with the last iteration of the WIDA standards, people used the acronym READ, at least I did to remember them. Now I use AND to remember them. Argue, narrate, inform, explain, my friendly names. And then lastly but not least is the mode of communications, which broadly are just interpretive and expressive. So we're going to focus and talk about what this means in ELA, which is standard number 2, as well as, of course, our focus is always on standard number 1, the language for social and instructional purposes. And don't worry, I think I saw Yena in here, who is the math program specialist. I put hearts next to all the other grade level and all the other contents because we love all of the content areas. So let's talk a little bit more about this. I want to talk about academic language. I pulled this quote from a literacy leadership brief where we talked about how in order to engage in academic language, we need to be paying special attention to engage in academic dialogue. Sorry, we need to be paying special attention to the academic language students. But I have a volunteer read that for us, unmute and read that for us. All names, kind of a popsicle stick thing.
I can
That's what make the Georgia TESOL officer volunteer. Come on.
Yeah. Yeah,
All right,
I can
Brian,
read it
you're
or
in.
somebody else. Okay. Such pressure. I don't know if I can handle it. Academic language is the language required to participate in academic instruction and to be able to read texts and write original academic and literary compositions. It is typically more formal, abstract, and challenging than language used in common non-academic settings.
So I'm going to do a little activity here, and this is one that I've done with my students before too. And hopefully you like it, you can also use it. It just talks about how academic language is a little bit different. So I'll start with a quick video and then we'll do the activity. And please let me know if you can hear it, just give me a thumbs up, please. Okay.
Academic writing has a formal written tone and uses good grammar and spelling. For example, you may text your friend, "Want to go to the flicks tonight?" Or even just, "Movie?" Written in a formal tone, this would be, "Would you like to go to a movie this evening?" While the ideas in academic writing should be straightforward, their expression is often presented in an indirect way. This is referred to as hedging. For example, instead of writing, "This proves that climate change is a hoax," in academic writing, you might write, "This supports the idea that climate change may not be a threat." The words highlighted are hedging expressions to show that you realize climate change is a complex topic with no single right answer. Further, ideas that you may write in an academic essay are supported by research. So, in the example earlier, you potentially would write, Dhaka 2020 found that in the past, temperature changes have regularly occurred in 300-year cycles. This supports the idea that climate change may not be a threat. Finally, academic writing has a formal structure. It should start with an introduction where you formulate your main ideas, which are then elaborated in the body paragraphs, and then ends in a conclusion paragraph.
Thank you. And there's a little activity down here you can also do with students. So I do want to say, like, if a student is saying climate change is a hoax, and that's a hook that they're using to hook a reader in for persuasive or an argumentative speech, I could see that being used. But I think this still illustrates what we mean by academic language. But there's this really great activity that students can do here as well, where they start to put what the academic terminology would sound like with the non-academic right next to it. So in this essay, I will talk about, maybe instead you'd say this because we're not seeing that first person as much in that academic language. The literature suggests a variety of explanation. So I can do, instead of maybe the non-academic way to say it is a couple of reasons. What gets really interesting, I've done this with students before, and they put things in here that maybe the computer would say is kind of, well, I think they're right, but that the computer would say is wrong. And that's perfect, just like when we said, well, climate change a hoax, is that academic language or not? But I could see that being used for academic. How could we reconceptualize some of these things to fit into academic and non? So hopefully that's something we can use with students. And another thing that they talk about in that very same brief is the importance of vocabulary. So I have another chat question for you guys, and then if you could answer for me, what does vocabulary instruction look like in your classroom? It might be a routine that you use, it might be a strategy that you, or a graphic organizer that you use all the time. Go ahead and pop those in the chat. I'd love to see. That's awesome. Authentic around the topic of food. Absolutely. That's great. Mm-hmm. Thank you. The contact, scaffolding. The people repetition, looking at synonyms, visuals, great. Okay. Vocabulary search, which directly practices identifying the opposite prefixes, suffixes, and roots. Oh, yay. Oh, great. Okay. So I was wondering if anybody would have mentioned these, but so there's Marzano's 6 steps. I think everyone's heard of that. There are Freire models, of course, and then academic vocabulary charts. There are so many different ways to do vocabulary work, and I'm seeing in a lot of our answers that we keep talking about these contextualizing. See that right as soon as I said it, right on cue. Pamela, context, visual, giving them repetition and practice, or building that schema. All those things are so important. So I wanted to share a strategy that I use today. It's called list group label. Maybe you've heard it. If you've heard of it, can you give me a little reactions or thumbs up or for everyone, perhaps? Okay, great. So list group label. So list group labels is pretty, the basic directions are to choose a topic, brainstorm words that relate to the topic, organize words into similar categories, and as many of you guys have mentioned, making sure that it's in context is very, very important. And I added a little bit to that and making sure it's contextualized in this example that I'll go through. So let's try that. So let's pretend the unit is around elephants, and we're trying to build our vocabulary around that. So we're going to start listing some words. And if you want to participate in the chat, you can put some words in the chat, and maybe they'll show up on this list. So students will start giving you words that you can use. Tough, big ears, that's great. There's that word big as an adjective. That's something that I definitely want to put into. Mammoth, that's also really interesting. I'm wondering if the student here had maybe if it's a point of clarification or because of the sizes and the similarities. You'll get more words. Trunk, you might get a word in a different language. It's beautiful. They're using their home language, sport, and you might even get a word, a drawing. That's my drawing of a. So that's totally fine. The students will then be, oh, cool, mammal, endangered. Oh, you guys are giving me great words. Sorry, I didn't come up. Trunk, I got trunks. That's great. So the next thing that students will do is they're going to start to group these based on similarities. And then after grouping, they're going to start to label the groups. And this is where it starts getting really, oh, sorry, one thing to highlight, as you're noticing, we're keeping that language in there, that home language support in there for students. That's totally fine, and keeping the images in there. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting when students start to group and label, because they have very different ideas sometimes about what things go together and why they go together. So we want to capitalize on that and give them the opportunity to have those rich discussions and practice that in orally or in writing. So I like to add an explain element to this. So here's an example of a sentence stem you can use, in writing. If you want to make one for them to use orally, do make sure that you're practicing that in rehearsing it with students. And on the bottom, here's an example of a word bank. That could be helpful for students, whether they're writing and they need to find words to use orally, of course, and even when they're looking through a book, these can be their signal words. And when they see these words, now I'm thinking, oh, the author's trying to clue me into compare and contrast because they're using the language of compare and contrast. So while we're talking about student discussions, the other thing that came up in that article was how important oral language is. And I wanted to talk to you guys about a strategy called QSSSA, QSSSA. If you've heard of this strategy before, can you give me some reaction, a thumbs up, a heart, anything, or a sad face if you don't, you hate this strategy? Ooh, Donna said it. Ooh. Awesome. All right. Cool. So I'm going to walk you through this strategy, and it's a great one that we can use to support our learners to use language intentionally while still participating in rigorous and rich academics. Up at the top, I have the 5 parts of the QSSA: question, signal, stem, share, and assess. And here on the side, I just have purpose, some tips, and an example. So let's go through this. The first thing you're going to do is give your students a question to discuss. And you want to make sure, this keeps coming up, that the question is contextualized. If you are reading a shared text with your students, you're going to take out a question from that shared text. You want to make sure that it is not just talking for talking's sake, although that's great. You want to make sure that academic language and the content are both being there here. So once you give students the questions, you want to tell them a signal to show you when they're ready. It can be as simple as make a fun face when you're ready or thumbs up when you're ready, however you would like to do it. The purpose of this is to give students the wait time that they need to think about the questions. And so some of my students during this time are looking in the text for evidence because they know that they're about to share and they want to be able to support their answer. And some of my students are jotting things down, or maybe even making like a little quick sketch to help them remember, oh yeah, I want to talk about this. That's great. You want to make sure during this time that the students have the supports and scaffolds. So once the students have shown you that they're ready, you give them a stem and you model and you practice that stem with them. So for example, the stem that I chose to give students, I think Esperanza could not hear the heartbeat of the earth because, and then we practice that. What you see in red actually on my board, it looked a little different. So I would have older stems that we had used, and some of them are kind of almost, I don't want to use the word kind of generic, but you can use it across content areas like the text says, this proves. And we would practice that as well. So that while students are working with this new stem, we're still reminding them and we are still encouraging them to continue to use that academic language that we've already been working on and we've already practiced. So the next part then, they're ready to share. So students are talking and they're sharing. And the most important thing you can be doing as a teacher is to circulate and to listen to those conversations. This is your opportunity to find out, are there any misconceptions that's going on in the whole group? How are students using language? How are they understanding the content? And I always had a clipboard walking around in class to jot those notes down. I'm not sure if others folks do, but that I've always had that. And it really comes in handy for this very last part called assess, where that can be done as a whole group. You can do a ticket out the door, however you want. But what I really like about this time is while you're circulating, you're picking up on really great language that the students are using, and you can warm call them. So I would need this if I was a student in class. I can be very shy. So going up to the student and saying, hey, that was a wonderful answer. Be prepared to share because we're going to be calling on you during the assess phase. So what that looks like in the classroom is I heard Berenice provide very compelling evidence. Berenice, can you share what you shared in your group? And then having other folks add on. Who can add on to that? Or using your handy circulation clipboard and realizing, oh, Berenice just said something that tied with what Marco was saying in his group. I might even call on Marco and say, Marco, your group was just saying something like that. Can you add on to that? So that's a great strategy that I like to use called QSSA. And we talked a little bit about oral language and we talked about how we need to give students the opportunity to practice language. And now we want to talk about how that might look differently in different modes of communication. So for example, I'm going to show you 2 pieces of text that are talking about the green and white. On the left is a text. Of the text is the written version of the text, and on the right is the spoken text. So I want you to take a minute to look and read through this. And then I want you to answer the following question in the chat. How are the written and spoken texts same, and how are they different? already seen some folks giving us some answers. Spoken gives clarification, more formal register and written text. Are still reading and thinking, that's no problem. I have an answer key for us. Bam. Look at that. Oh, sorry. That's great. I got some more. Both give the same information. Written is more concise and formal. The spoken elaborates, slightly less formal. Alexandra said the spoken text gives us examples. So yeah, so spoken text does tend to be more informal, and it is longer than written text. They use more words and more sentences, but the sentences are usually shorter. And then in essays, the sentences may be longer, they may be varied and complex in a different way. And they will be using more, tier 2 or tier 3 vocabulary words. The formal register that Dr. Webb was talking about, we can see that. And you may have noticed here in the circle, if you're looking at this, there's a circle around, let's see if I can get this laser pointer. Hopefully you can see that. There's a circle around first person. And you might be thinking, yeah, my students use first person all the time, maybe when they're writing a language, or sorry, maybe when they're writing a narrative. And that's correct. It is correct and it is appropriate. And to that, I want to say that this all depends on the standard you're working in and the key language use. Those always need to be considered because they influence what the text looks like. So if I were to ask you what the key language use and standard that best matches this text is, you probably won't say narrate and language because we write narratives. We expect something else from narratives. And that's because there are these predictable patterns to language, and we may not even realize them without really thinking about it. So I'm going to show you what I mean. So we're going to play a game called Guess the Text. I'm going to give you a piece of text. It might be the beginning, it might be the middle. It's just going to be a small snippet. And I want you to tell me what kind of text you think it is. Okay, first, to whom it may concern. A letter, a business letter. Ooh. Yep, I'm seeing a lot of letters. It's right. Formal letter. There's so many ways to, yep, a letter. Perfect. It looks like we got that one. Let's try the next one. Once upon a time. Or a fairy tale, a narrative. Oh, I really like how Julie put fairy tale / narrative. We're definitely going to talk about genres. So, yep, it's a story, it's a fairy tale. And we'll do the next one. This phenomenon is referred to as a black hole. Definitely something in science, I would say. Informational science article, science text, science thinking. That was the best one. Nonfiction, informative. We have so many different ways to say what this text is. And then here's the kicker. Ready? Orange juice, eggs, bread, carrots, diapers. What kind of text is this? A grocery list. Yes, Tiffany. Oh, everybody. Yes, yeah. Yes, it is a list. And that really is a piece of text. So without any context, just that one little snippet of text you guys got, you're able to tell me what that text was. Yeah, sorry, I saw Dr. Webb's chat, so I got. Okay, never mind. I'm good. Sorry. So we're thinking about these because we see these snippets of text and we know what they are because we're used to these predictable patterns. So as we saw in our activity just now, there's so many different ways to almost say a similar or the same thing. So I've heard of text types. I've heard of genres. What WIDA does is they take genre families and they call them key language uses. I really like genre galaxies. That sounds very cool to me. Yeah, Dr. Webb, I want you to, the recipe, Yeah, got it. I want you to share whatever that is with me. It sounds like it's going to be dessert. So we read text differently and write text differently, dependent upon a number of things. So these predictable patterns that we encounter, we really need to illuminate. So, for example, up at the top here, we see arguments, explanations, information reports, a recount, which I believe was in the last iteration of WIDA, even stories, which we call narratives, some of us, right? So there's different ways to kind of say these things, but they have these predictable patterns right here. For example, for a narrative, it's typically, not always, but it's typically, it starts with an orientation, complication, then there's an evaluation sometimes, a resolution. I've even seen a code at that. And to break it down even more, there are some languages that we use for the language of compare and contrast that could be used maybe more widely throughout. Making sure that we are cognizant of that and teaching into it is very important. But I wanted to make one small side note. These things can and do open. How many times have we heard a persuasive speech, but in the middle, the author decides to put this compelling narrative story in it. So that speech will have narrative elements, and that's okay. Because unlocking these pieces not only helps students create texts that follow the genre or text type or whatever you want to call it, but it also gives students the opportunity to then experiment by accumulating capital, how language functions. So let's talk a little bit about how we choose these texts. We want to make sure that these texts are complex, that they are engaging, that they feature a load of examples of rich academic language that our students can engage with, but we need to make sure that these texts are accessible. So, number one, it is very important to make sure that we are connecting our materials to our students' lives. We're honoring their kinds of knowledge and capitalizing on them to bridge the content and language. We would really be missing out on a linguistic resource if we don't do that. The more students know about the text, the easier it is for them to interact and understand the text because they can make those connections. That's why it's so important to relate the content to the students and continue to build up and off of that. So when we're choosing text, though, some questions we can ask ourselves is, what do students already know about this text and how can we build on prior knowledge? How can we honor that and bring it into our classroom to make things more accessible for students? Considering students' home language literacy is also really important. We want to think about ways that we can connect their language resources that they already have with what they're learning. And as soon as I see this, the first thing that comes to mind are cognates. I'm not sure if you guys caught that. That was in the Freyer model. We were studying the word cognate for crying out loud. It's funny, but that's another way to kind of make that language visible. And of course, we want to talk about how this text supports students learning the content, making sure that it's accessible and rigorous grade level content, and their language development. And that's when we start talking about these language functions and language features. Okay. So let's talk about those strategies that we can use to intentionally teach into those language functions and features that I just mentioned. So another resource that you'll find in your WIDA book at the end of each grade level clusters material and at the very end of the book as well, they're all compiled into one are these proficiency level descriptors. Are these annotated language samples. I will talk about proficiency level descriptors later. So these annotated language samples are really great because you can start seeing how the language presents in context and how it starts to come alive. And actually doing something like this, maybe with a unit 7, is a great starting point and identifying and intentionally planning for the linguistic needs and demands of that. So here's an example of what this might look like for a middle school unit. So yay, shout out to all my middle school teachers out there. Let's pretend we are in 6th grade. And I pulled all of this right out of the WIDA book. It is just on one, or I guess it's across 2 pages, but I snipped it just so you can see it. So I mentioned that to say that it is a really easy format to look at. It won't look like a crowded slide when you try to do this work. It will be a lot neat. So I hope you don't feel overwhelmed by it. But so here's that language functions and features that I pulled up in the language citations. And here is an exemplar there is an exemplar summative assist. And you can see here that the teacher went through and found those language functions and features by utilizing those either tools. And for us, by doing this, we can start to identify those language demands and start to incorporate that into our work as we read and construct texts with students. But how do we incorporate work to that level? Let's pretend that we are working on in this unit and we're talking about engaging and adjusting for audience, maybe using language to draw the reader in. So think about that example, and we're going to try a different strategy, and it's called sentence expansion. Can I have some reactions if you've heard of sentence expansion before? Yeah. Oh, okay. Cool. Good. Oh, nice. All right. So this might be a very quick one. And for those folks who, and hang on, because I have something that'll build on this if you've already heard of this, but you can ask very simple questions to expand on these sentences. And I just want to let you know, I put one example in red and one in blue just to show you ideas of different responses. So let's go ahead and try. So the man left. Cool. When did he left? He left yesterday, or he left on Tuesday. Cool. Where did he left? Maybe he left in class. Maybe he left at his house. And then why? Maybe because he heard a joke, or maybe because something funny. And there's a lot of different questions that we can start asking students to get them to pull that language out. But what happens at the end, really, I stopped just with those three, is that you have a sentence that went from the man left to yesterday. The man left in class because he heard a joke. Or from the man left to the man left at his house on Tuesday because something funny. And you might notice that the way that I use, or the way that we use yesterday here, whereas the way that we use on Tuesday over here, that's different. And that's something that we can teach into students, how we can rephrase and change the language to mean the same thing, or to show emphasis, or use it for a certain particular purpose. So we can expand on this as well. For those of you who have heard of sentence expansion, have you also heard of sentence patterning? I bet once I show it to you, some folks will see it. Or hopefully not, so this can be something new as well. So sentence patterning and expansion, I like to give this to folks to see them. I like to give this to students for them to be able to see how language can be used in a particular way. So for example, here I have at the top all the different categories of words that students can put in here, and they can start expanding their sentences. So we went from the man laughed to the funny, or the quiet, or the shy man. And then we can link that to what kind of adverbs we can have with that. The funny man laughed loudly with his friends, or the quiet man laughed secretly to himself, or the shy man laughed softly. One way to take that and to put it with content is to have students start asking questions, creating these sentences about maybe characters in a book. So if I were to ask you to do, actually, let me ask, does anyone know who these famous twins are? Yeah, okay, that is Fred and George. So let's say we're reading Harry Potter, and we asked our students to make a sentence, or to choose one of these sentences to describe either Fred or George. And that way you can give students an example, and they can choose, okay, well, the man laughed loudly with his friends. That one would suit him very well. Or you can give students the opportunity to make it themselves and to create a sentence for other characters, like Voldemort, where the sentence would be, the evil man laughed maniacally with his. That's a lot more fitting for us. So there's a lot of different ways we can do this to work with. So we've talked about different strategies and different scaffolds that we use to help students access content. We saw visuals, word gigs, sentence frames. But we always want to make sure that we are providing students with the appropriate scaffold, and that we are aware of where our students are linguistic. So I have a question for you all. Are you familiar with the stages of second language acquisition? Okay, so I put these all out of order. These are not in order. A, B, C, D, F, not wrong. I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to read these very quickly. And when we figured out what the very first stage of language acquisition is, you can type that paragraph number into the chat box. And we're going to see if we can uncover and figure out which one goes first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and And a couple answers. And a couple B's here. Oh, 3 B's. All right, let's see. And it's B. B, like the silent period. And I read research that said, I read research that had said, so don't quote me on this. I don't even think it was peer reviewed, but it starts like a little less 10 hours is as little as it could be, but it can last even longer, certainly. And that's the part where maybe the students are not speaking as much. You may feel that, oh, perhaps they're not engaging in the content, but that's not really what's happening. It's a normal part of second session. They may not be speaking, but they can still simply understand and participate. Okay, let's see if we can figure out what the second one is. You type your answer paragraph into the chat. Everyone's on it. It is E. And here we're still emphasizing on that emphasis is still around that listening. So they're out of the silent period, but there's still a lot of listening going on. Okay, y'all know the drill. Number 3. I like how we're getting all these. Ooh. Okay, let's see what it is. It's deep. So students that are still needing, or they're going to still need those context clues and familiar topics. That's part of the reason why we still want to make sure that we're relating to students' prior knowledge, like we talked about earlier. But during this phase, they're still continuing to become fluent, but they're not quite at that stage. Okay, number 4. Any guesses there? I'm seeing a sea of C's, and that is correct. That speech is fairly fluent now, but there's still some gaps in vocabulary, and we need to be teaching in those dynamic phrases as well. 3. All right, number 5. F, that is right. That's right. As you can see here, that they are especially fluent in social language. Again, that's another reason why we need to highlight that academic language to make sure that is also being grown as well. And last but not least, process of elimination will even tell us. Hey, thank you. Where students are essentially, fluent and comfortable speaking. And great work. Everyone passed 100. Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, so while we're thinking about the way students progress in language, it's also important for us to be keeping note and track of how students are progressing. So WIDA has these proficiency level descriptors at the end of the book and after each grade level cluster's material. And here it's when you're planning and when you're thinking about differentiating materials, you can use this as a tool to plan your work with students and to plan for that language intentionally and think about how to differentiate those materials so that it is accessible to all of your students. And when you are assessing students' work, you can also, you'll notice this says interpretive at the top. If you're assessing students' work, let's say you're even just walking around during the share portion of the QSSA and you're taking notes on how students are doing. Maybe you're tracking and looking at their oral language development and you want to be taking note of that. So you can use the expressive proficiency language descriptor charts. And if you'll notice, this does look very different from the other one that we saw. And that's because this comes from a WIDA focus bulletin where they write about these language portfolios. And those are amazing ways to look at students' progress. This was written in a teacher-friendly language. And I wish that the whole book had this, but unfortunately, this is the only one I think that WIDA provided. It may have been the expressive and interpretive forms, but this is wonderful. You can stick that in the front of a language portfolio. And for each quarter or semesters, however you do it, you can be checking out what students are doing and how they're progressing in that language and use that as a resource and data to inform your math. So if you want to learn more, about learning opportunities around WIDA in particular, I did want to plug the WIDA self-paced online workshops that are open until August 31st to Georgia's public K-12 educators with a WIDA secure portal account. If you don't have a WIDA secure portal account, you can speak with your testing coordinator and they should be able to get that to you. And you can also go to, I'm going to show you where on the Department of Education's website you can go to look at it. If you're anything like me, you need to pull content. So I have a very hard to see screenshot here, but I'm going to walk you through it. All right, y'all. Up at the top, you'll see these lovely faces of our exemplary teachers and English learners. And if you scroll down, you'll see something called professional learning, and it's right there. It's right there. It says professional. And if you can't see this, I did just want to say some of the things that are available to you are workshops for newcomers, workshops for long-term English learners, talking about using home language in the classroom, using the standards framework period as an approach. And then there's also things for social studies, for science, and for math as well. So there's a lot of learning that you can do there. And I wanted to close us off and save time for Q&A. So I wanted to close us off with a question. This is a quote that I got from West Ed's Ada. Every time I see her name, it's her first name is Ada Walke, and Ada is one letter off from Lida, and her last name is W. So every time I see her name, I might be the only person, but I think it's Lida. It's Ada Walke. And she is a very important person. She's a director at the National Research and Development Center for Improving the Education of English Learners in Secondary School at West Ed. And then Dr. George Bunchu's professor of education at UC. So I love this quote. It's amplify, don't simplify. And in the chat, I want you to share what this quote means to you and how you think you'll practice this for the English learners in your classroom. Yeah, Julie, thank you. So I hate that. Oh, Beth, yes, absolutely. Oh, these are so good. I'm gonna read these because I want everyone to hear this. And I don't know if you will, if you're listening to a recording, you probably won't be able to see the chat. So make language visible and comprehension. We're not just dumbing it down. Don't assume they won't understand, but step it up. That's great. They will understand. They do understand. They probably know more than you. Just speak the language. That's scaffold up instead of watering down, build on their knowledge and skills. That's right. Create academic challenge and modify appropriate, not watering down the content. Exactly. We want to make sure that we are amplifying that content. Using scaffolds for supports, not as crutches for them to not have a challenging academic environment. Yeah, use prior knowledge, raise the bar, challenge them, scaffolding. Create clarity, not simplicity. Ooh, I like that. DP Byram. I want to put that in quotes and quote you next time. That's great. Expose students to grade level standards and rigor, but with the scaffolded activities they need to see. Don't simplify, give more supports. And Bowen, I agree with all this. I agree with you. They're all wonderful. So in our last 10 minutes here, I was hoping to say 15. I'm sorry, y'all. In our last 10 minutes here, I want to just open this up for questions and answers. I want to read Melanie's really quickly before I do that. Provide a challenging language environment while using higher language knowledge. Higher language knowledge, and there's this concept of funds of knowledge. Kathy Amonte talks about it, and she talks about how our students are just these rich funds of knowledge. They come with so much knowledge that we can utilize in the classroom, that we can connect to in the classroom. Our students come knowing different languages, having experiences that are different from yours. And these perspectives add so much to our classroom, to the other students that are in that classroom, to be exposed to these different perspectives, ways of thinking, and ways of being and doing. So yes, Happy Amonte, if you want to check that out, Funds of Knowledge. And okay, so that was it. So thank you all so much for joining me. Now I'm just opening it up for Q&A. If you have any questions, I'm right here. Thank you so much, Julie. Oh, Sandra, you want to find the WIDA focus bulletins? I usually Google them, but I'm gonna put my email in the chat because the one that I'm thinking about in particular, I have to find it and remember what it's titled. So I'm gonna put my email in the chat and just send me a message and I will send you the right.
Asha, I have loved your presentation so much, but before people start to hop off, can I make a plug for something really quickly? And Brian, if you're going to do this already, then I apologize, but y'all, we are so excited to have our wonderful content and ESOL specialists from the DOE presenting for us now, but we're really also excited to come together and not be on Zoom this fall in Athens at the end of October. And we are leaving our conference proposals open a little bit longer because we have like 88 conference proposals already, which is great, but we don't have enough K-12. We got a lot of higher ed, we got adult ed, we got leading K-12 programs. We need more higher ed. And we need more K-12. So if you haven't proposed yet and you are higher ed and you want to, go ahead. But all of you K-12 folks, stop being shy. We've got posted on our website the links, not only to the proposal where you can put in your 10-word title, your very short 50-word abstract, and your 150 to 250-word description right there on the website. But Dr. David Chiesa also has put in a worksheet to help you out. And my puppy dog says, he thinks you should all put in a proposal. You will be fantastic if you do. And anyway, that's my plug. And I'm putting the link in the chat.
I was going to ask Dr. Webb as well. You mentioned Dr. Chiesa. He did a PL, right, as well, for how to write a proposal.
Mm-hmm. He did.
He did, and the worksheet is posted. So y'all, if you missed his PL, then the worksheet's on the Georgia TESOL site. So
the slides and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cool. The slides, everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Asha, one question that came up earlier was, are you going to make your slides available?
You can clean them up and make them available for you. Yeah. There's a lot of animation that goes on.
Yeah.
Like a QSI will just look like a blue blank thing. That's always my issue. I'm sorry. I will clean them up and make them appropriate.
Yeah, that's fine. If you send them to me, I will make sure everyone gets them.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to go through. Someone asked about where you can locate the academic writing video. I can paste the link into the chat and get that for you as well. I can stop sharing, I think.
And you're going to get you're going to get not only the recording link, but you're also going to get the PowerPoint slides. So I just want to encourage you guys, let's multiply this PL.
Mm-hmm.
Let's multiply it. Let's share it with colleagues. Let's share it with friends. Let's share it with folks who need to hear this. Let's share it with ELA folks who are teaching ELs who aren't ESOL endorsed, who need to know this, who need these tips, who need to start contextualizing and using the WIDA standards to integrate language and content. So I want to encourage everybody who's on this call, share this with at least one colleague and make sure that they know that they can come here and they can join us for the rest of the series and continue to learn, because our Georgia DOE leadership right now and our talent in our terms of Asha and her colleagues in the content in ESOL, it is amazing. And if you guys don't know, I have 32 years in Georgia. We have never had more talent and better leadership at the Georgia DOE than we have right now. They are amazing. So we're just so grateful to have them. So anyway, share this out.
Thank you so much, Dr. Webb. I see that Dr. Baker, I think, meant Dr. Baker's here, and Yena's here. That's so exciting.
Yes.
And it looks like I'm going to try to find the Alexandra, did you want the one that I spoke about for the language portfolios in particular?
Yes, where you can see the quarters, quarter 1, 2, 3,
yeah,
4, with boxes.
Well, thank you very much, Asha. This was a wonderful presentation with chock full of information. And so thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and expertise with us. It was really great. So just for our next session, which will be next Thursday at this same time, same place, will be our third of the fifth series session, our third session of the fifth out of the five. We will focus on inquiring EL minds want to know and participate in social studies. So this session will focus on integrating language and content, but more specifically in the content area of social studies. Yes, and get your conference proposals in. So thank you very much for attending, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Dr. Hibbs, for moderating, and thanks to everybody for being here. And Asha, a special thanks to you. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate everyone for joining. This was great. Maybe one day I can see you all in person. I know I'm Dr. Webb. I apologize. I was multitasking. Alessandra, I just put that resource in and for you. And Dr. Webb, Dr. Hibbs had said a second earlier about the May 18th, May 18th. Is that a get together?
Yes, we had our social on May 18th. Yes. What did you say about that?
Oh, sorry. It already happened on May 18th. So will you guys be doing some more get-togethers in person?
We are going to do more get-togethers in person. Some folks ask us to do us over the summer, but I think we are going to take a little break in July. But we really had so much fun with our socials. And if you don't know what we did, y'all, on May 18th, we all, not all, but most of the board members just went to a local place near where they live in their community and hosted a social. And we just put it out on the website and you could sign up. So we had an idea, but we had people also just decide to come and show up. And we all got together and we had, like snacks and, sometimes people had sweet tea and lemonade, and sometimes they might have chosen to have, a different beverage, but everybody had a good time and we had the most wonderful professional conversations and connections. So we're going to do that again. And hopefully you guys can come. And if there's anybody who lives in a part of the state where we didn't have a social, we're a little thin over in Southwest Georgia right now. But if anybody wants to host over there, Georgia TESOL is willing to support, and some of us might be willing to travel down also. So we just want to keep doing this. We believe in the people who are a part of the TESOL community in Georgia, and we just want to build this community and we want to be strong together. So, and I thank Dr. Terrell, who was instrumental in pulling that off, because it would not have happened without her planning, because we had all these different ideas and she finally grabbed us all by the, collar and said, you've got to decide what we're going to do. And we did, and it came out really well. So Dr. Terrell, thank you for your leadership on that.
Thank you. My pleasure. And kudos to my team too, Brian being one of them. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Melanie just made I met Melanie at our social at the at Melton's on Georgia on North Decatur Road here in Decatur, and it was so awesome. We had the best time. So Melanie's a new professional friend of mine. So great outcomes for that.
Dr. Webb, when you guys were having conversations, did you use like talk stems or sentence starters? No. We still use academic language, I'm sure of it. Yes. Well, I try to answer all the questions in the chat. It looks like there weren't many. Just kind of asking where a couple resources are. So thank you all so much. And I want to echo what Dr. Baker said. Thank you for having us. The leadership team at Georgia TESOL is great. I remember back a while ago when I used to volunteer with Georgia TESOL. It's always been great. It's just so wonderful that there's such a group of dedicated folks who literally just volunteer their time to help teachers learn and for students to grow. It's a really great organization. So,
thank you all.
Well, good night, everybody. I am signing off, and I encourage everybody else to go and have a wonderful evening. And but be back next week, same bat time, same bat channel for those people who are from my era.
Mm.